This is the session on human social interaction in the college experience, and I'm Madhura Bandyopadhyay. I've been at John Jay since 2019, and I'm in writing studies in the English department, and I've been teaching for much longer than from 2019, and I've seen changes happening. In the US academic scene, and I've also taught in other countries. Changes that are taking place right now have been, fascinating to me, and fascinating is kind of an euphemism. Sometimes I've been disheartened, but then there's reason to hope as well. But having said that, let's just first hear from all of you who you are and why you're here maybe, or what you do at John Jay. So anybody who wants to start.
I'll go first. If there's a lot of background noise, I apologize. My name is Phoenix Paz. I'm a graduate teaching fellow in the history department, and I'm a newly adjunct professor in the Latin American and Latinx studies department. I teach history of science, medicine, and technology and intro to Latin American history.
Okay, that's great to know. And, good to have people from, like, I guess, different stages in life, because these are changes that sometimes old timers like us react to differently. And then there's reason for hope, which I hope we get from the young people. Yes. And so who wants to go next?
I'll go. I'm Monica Matisi. I work in the science department. I teach chemistry, and I'm looking forward to this because I do a lot of social interaction in my classroom. So I want to hear what you're going to educate us about today. So
Okay, that's great to know.
Yes. Hi, my name is Noam Haviv. I'm from the LPS department and also part of the International Criminal Justice Program. I'm very happy to be here. I choose this session because I think social interactions are one of the most important things today. Yeah.
Absolutely. And great to have people from different disciplines here, because, as I know that, for myself, I'm always interacting with colleagues from the same walks of life, and sometimes we tend to discuss the same things. And so it's nice to have people from other fields of study.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nilsa Santiago. I don't have much of a voice today. I am also in the Law and Police Science Department with Noam, and it's great to see all these faces here. So I'm eager to go back on Tuesday to start teaching my courses. Hopefully my voice will improve by then. But I'm here because I'm curious, and I think these faculty development days are wonderful, and they really are really enriching.
Right. Thank you. And we could hear you, and we could perfectly understand you.
Thank you.
So what I'll do is I do have some slides, but I kind of don't like staring at slides, especially on Zoom. So I'll try to use these as little as possible. But so as you can see, this is the TLC slide with all the stuff that I just mentioned. But I just wanted to give you an overview of what I'm hoping to address. And the first thing we can talk about, since all of us are relatively experienced teachers here, the role of the human, and the human in teaching and learning. But number two will be really interesting to me. What is happening at John Jay, and how can we think about it? And then in the last part, maybe we can talk about what we can do. And so in the first part, I just wanted us to think about what role the human plays in teaching and learning in the college experience, and also in equity and inclusion for marginalized students. I'm in the writing studies department, so we often have this thing where we ask students to write for 3 to 5 minutes. I won't ask you to write, but let's take maybe 3 minutes to think about some of these aspects, and you can come to this from any angle that you like. But, you know, what does human interaction look like in teaching and learning? Maybe why it is important, and especially why it is important in the college experience. And is it especially relevant for marginalized groups of students? And, you know, I'll put my timer on. We can think for 3 minutes or write for 3 minutes, and then we can come back and share what we think. And I'll try to put these on chat as well so that we all have access to my questions. Okay, so are people ready to share their thoughts? I mean, why are we even having this workshop? Is it relevant? Is it relevant to have human interaction in teaching and learning? Or what do you think? What's the role of the human? Yes, go ahead, Noam.
So I'll start by saying that today with the AI technologies and you know, everything is getting so high tech. So sometimes people forget how to talk to each other without using the AI. And I feel that you know, when we teach, uh, I prefer usually teaching in person, although I do both. Um, First of all, I think that when a person is in the class, is talking, you know, for example, no one can mistake. They understand that my native language is not English. So there is something that is very important by bringing the knowledge as simple as you can, and also trying to bring the highest context that you should. Um, I wrote some things here. So make sure you bring the knowledge as simple as possible, be kind, and be a teacher. And when I say be a teacher, it's also not only the professional part of being a teacher, it's also say to your students that your door will be always open to, and that there is no stupid or silly questions. Every question is legit, you know. I teach mostly, even though my topics are usually prisoners rehabilitation or human trafficking, I usually teach statistics. And I let all my students know, you know, they come to my class usually terrified, because statistics for BA or for MA, both I teach, is something that students are afraid of. And I feel that, you know, to put the tense tension, pressure down, to let them know that everyone can do that, and I'm here to for them to help, is something that is very important for me. I also encourage them to participate, and I'm telling them, do not be afraid to make mistakes. Not in if you write something in English, I know I am a minority in this sense, but if someone do mistakes in the English, I am not taking down points. And the reason is because I do sometimes too. So I let them know, you can do mistakes. English mistakes, it's fine in my statistics class. Just try to participate and be part of the class. That's
I
about
think
it.
some very relevant things that you mentioned was a lot of human qualities. You talked about being kind as a teacher. You talked about leaving your door open and, you know, kind of mitigating anxiety amongst your students. And these are all human qualities. You also said it's not just about being a professional. Interestingly, you teach statistics, but at the same time, so, you know, you're saying, and what you're saying reminds me in a different context of Paulo Freire's, like, the banking concept of education, where if we assume that students are just bank vaults where deposit knowledge into them, that's not the kind of interaction that we desire, right? And so I think you brought in the idea of being a human very, very well. But you also talked about like being a second language speaker and providing that model in the classroom, and also kind of saying that it's okay to not be proficient in a language, but the fact that in the interaction you can do that, I think that was fascinating. So
if I can just add, the reason I brought up the accent issue is because I think that there is, I read about it in Google Scholar. I didn't even know that there is literature about it, but there is the accent discrimination. And my wife, she brought it up to me that she felt that sometimes because of her accent, people think that she's stupid. Like so she's a social worker. She have a master degree. She's very smart, to my opinion. And sometimes she feel that because of her accent, people don't really listen to what she have to say, and this is very disturbing and upsetting to me. So this is something that's one of the reasons I brought it up. And when we speak about diversity, I feel that the society is not always open to different accents or
yes, and very soon we are going to talk about all of the things that we learn in the classroom. And, you know, whatever your subject is, statistics or chemistry or something else, but there are all these kinds of learning also going on, right? That students can use later. Yes, and so anybody else wants to share what they thought about, like the role of the human?
I'll go. I kind of took it a different way than Noam because my classroom's very we work together. It's always in group work. And so there's a lot of respect that goes on in my classroom. I'm sorry, I'm a little sick. And so in like when we do a lot of the learning in the classroom, it's always group work and it's always like I try to stay away from individuals because they have to understand that they have to work together at some point. So like going back to the social media thing that Noam had mentioned, they are on their phones all the time. So we try and get them, try and get them out because they have to understand that they're not going to survive, especially like I'm in the science majors, they're not going to survive this alone, right? So they need that human interaction and they have to understand how to work with other people. And so a lot of the group work that goes into it, they have to learn themselves, right? Because they really didn't have to do this for years. I teach like the entry level students. So their college experience is extremely different if they're behind a computer versus if they're in person. And I think that a lot of the learning that has to happen has to be in person and has to be social in order for them to be able to function in society. So, a lot of it is doing that. So understanding what your group is able to do, understanding what your partner's able to do, understanding, they have a deficiency or they don't. There's students with IEPs, and then the students themselves don't know it. The student themselves that has it know it, but the other students don't. So they have to learn how to work with other people that definitely don't have their level of knowledge. So I think the role of the human hits all levels, especially in the college experience, because they just have to be able to do it. They have to be able to communicate and understand one another.
Absolutely. And that understanding becomes so relevant to take with you wherever you go after college. And if you don't have that understanding, it's going to be really challenging for you. And even if you're online on social media, that's also a kind of human interaction, but you have to know how to interact with people, right? Okay. Anyone else wanted to share what they may have thought about in the 3 minutes?
I interesting because my discipline is history, and a lot of history is going home, reading the material, digesting it. And so one of the things that I'm always concerned about is how to give space for discussion, for disagreement, for different interpretations. And so I oftentimes give multiple primary sources with different perspectives to say, like, hey, our life experiences shape the way the world. How do your life experiences shape the way that you read this material? But I still haven't quite reached that point where this students feel really comfortable talking about that. So I'm always looking for new ways to engage them in those different things. The last semester was really exciting because one of my students came up to me and she's like, I get it. We see the things differently. That's why you make us read all of this different stuff about the same thing, because people get it differently. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. So it was really exciting when she got that one. And she figured it out. And it was wonderful.
Yes, and that's great to hear. And coming from like the English department myself, so, that's very, very relevant to us in subjects that are kind of very closely human. But it was also great to hear from other people from other disciplines about how perspective and different perspectives and human understanding from different perspectives can be so relevant in teaching and learning. Nilsa, did you want to comment at all?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. And when I read the question, the role of the human, I somehow thought of the role of the human professor in teaching and learning. And so I kind of looked at it that way. So my thoughts were that you can reach students through a variety of ways. When you're there in person with them, there's the visual aspect, there's the audio aspect, there's the aspect of who you as a professor remind these students of. And so these are little hooks that they can use to understand and remember information. And that's our purpose, is to facilitate learning. So to the extent that I present myself as in person to them, and they see me, they hear me, they feel me, this all helps them in their learning. And that's why I really favor in-person teaching rather over online, because I can't convey myself fully online through chat, through a discussion and assignment boards. And, it's like glorified email to me. But when I'm present with them, I can just show them who I am. I can sing, I can dance, I can jump up and down. And I do all of that. And then if they look at me, I say, why do you think I'm doing this? I am your living mnemonic device. And so, it connects. So that's the human part of me.
Right, right. Angela, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say so much of what I'm hearing is about the connection and the empathy that only humans can give each other, and model for each other. Part of what you're also sort of mentioning is the modeling that we do by having them work together, by showing up for each other. And it's very clear that some of what our students have lost is the ability to talk to people. And so providing those opportunities and sort of making them explicit and teaching through them, even when the topic's hard, or even when, we want them to understand that this person might actually really, really disagree with you. But how do you bridge that? How do you have a conversation, despite the fact that they might fundamentally disagree with you, or see history, or see English or a poem or anything, or not understand science in the same way. So I think it's incredibly powerful, particularly since I think students have lost so much ground in the personal connection realm.
Absolutely. And so, there's been so much valuable, valuable contribution here from people who really actually teach. And I had in my slides, some things to share as well. And so here are some things that I gathered when I was researching this subject. And so I guess psychologists and, neurologists even they will have specialized knowledge on this about how our brains develop in relations, neural networks develop in relation to other people. But from the perspective of educators, we know that knowledge is acquired in its ecological niche. So we are all parts of a system, and that system matters. So, knowledge acquisition is not just an individual activity. And social learning involves observational learning. And observational learning means kind of mimicry, the thing that you talked about, by looking at the professor, seeing various aspects, being inspired by them in some cases. So that's observational learning. But interactive learning is when the professor is with the student, and through a process of exchange, they move from step to step towards achieving something. And then, of course, there's cooperative learning, which involves things like group work, but also not just work. I mean, people exchange ideas through discussion or whatever else with their peers, and cooperate to kind of reach knowledge or reach new knowledge. For cognitive development, human interaction is important, and we know this, in the case of children so well, but in the case of old people also, things like dementia and other things develop way more in isolation. Things like motivation, self-esteem, and social emotional development, these happen through, these can improve through interaction. The affective benefits of learning or teaching, the place of emotion in the process of learning, that's not possible in a non-human situation. Or even if it will become possible through AI, the AI has to be close enough to something human, which can be a terrifying prospect, but which seems to be like an inevitable future. But it has to be human enough. And then, of course, linguistic benefits and communication skills of interaction, we cannot deny that. And these become absent if there is no social interaction. So now, as far as, and something which is very relevant to John Jay, is this idea of how social interaction is even more relevant to marginalized communities when they're, when students come from marginalized communities to college institutions of higher education. And this is from the scholar Maitreyi Gopalan and her two studies she talks about. It's there on this web page, MIT's Teaching and Learning Lab. And I'm just reading this because it seems so relevant. The sense of belonging of a student to the institution is so important. Evidence has shown that in certain contexts, a student's sense of belonging improves academic outcomes, increases continuing enrollment, and is protective for mental health. So many students complain about not being in a mental state to be in our classes, right? In some of the studies presented, these correlations were still present beyond the time frame of the analysis, suggesting that belonging might have a longitudinal effect. So even when they leave college, the sense of belonging stays with them. Providing a more adaptive interpretation of challenge seemed to help students in a belonging intervention make alternative and more adaptive attributions for their struggles, forestalling a potential negative impact on their sense of belonging. So to explain the second point a little bit, they did a study, an empirical study, where they made interventions where to improve students' sense of belongings in the first year of college. And then what they found was that if you gave them tools to adapt in the first year, then it stalled off potential negative impacts on their sense of belonging. This quotation I have here from the second study will explain this a little bit more, and how this improves retention of socially disadvantaged students at a broad access university. So students, particularly those with little knowledge of how college works, or those who have experienced discrimination or are aware of negative stereotypes about their social groups. So here that accent point that Noam, you talked about comes in. Negative stereotypes about their social group may make global interpretations of why college can be challenging, and may even associate challenges as evidence that they and students like them don't belong. With belonging interventions, the lay theory provided to students aims to frame the experience of challenge in more adaptive ways. Challenge and adversity are typical experiences, particularly during transitional moments, and should be expected. Adapting academically and socially takes time. Students will be more likely to persist, seek out campus resources, and develop social relationships. And so we can actually teach them through social interaction, the sense of belonging, which hopefully can help them in staying on in college, in persisting in college, not giving up, things like that. And so as a next step, I think, we found the importance of the role of the human. And now we'd like to talk a little bit about, why have the workshop? Are there challenges that we are seeing right now at John Jay? And I think this is the most relevant part of the workshop. This is likely to be the most relevant part of the workshop. And I wanted to share something about myself. The reason that I actually suggested the proposal for this workshop over the break was because I was totally disheartened by the sections that I was teaching in the last semester, the fall semester. It was already a class that where a lot of repeat students who hadn't succeeded in that course earlier, likely to come in. But also, these were two fully asynchronous online classes, and try as I might, I could not bring a lot of them to stay engaged with the class, and no matter how I tried. And the reasons, some of them were just not engaged. They'd taken the class and they were not engaging, but there were others who had very peculiar issues, such as feeling of guilt. They wanted to do the work, they wanted to meet the deadline, they could not meet the deadline, suffered from guilt. And this became a vicious circle. For some of them, there were other challenges. And so something that I wanted to ask you, and maybe we can do this, talk about this in pairs. And again, I'll put these questions on the chat. Where and how are we feeling challenges while teaching and learning at John Jay a few years into the post-pandemic future? So I realize we've been through the pandemic. It's been quite a while, and some issues are still showing up, or some new issues are showing up which weren't there before. And so, you can share personal anecdotes if you like the one that I shared about my online classes last semester. Anything to do with curriculum and pedagogy, anything to do with you thinking about holding inclusive anti-racist teaching practices, maybe that also involves human interaction, or anything to do with life outside the classroom. I mean, our students have terrible challenges with work-life balance. They work outside to make ends meet, and at the same time work in college. Their career choices as they go out, or any outside of college, or any point that you want to make. So what challenges are you seeing in the John Jay context, in the that we might want to talk about, that might be maybe coming from lack of human interaction, or something else? Because these are also students who grew up to an extent when there was little interaction in the pandemic. And so what I'll do is maybe would people like to go into breakout rooms? I guess I will put you in breakout rooms. I'll give you maybe 5 minutes to just think about the challenges that we are facing. So anyone ready to share what they think? is the current situation at John Jay with respect to human interaction?
I will gladly say something. I think there's a lot of things that on those bullet points that I could address. So I'm just going to stick to like one of them because I could probably be here for another hour on this. But
Feel free to share as much as you like, and we'll go around and then come back.
so I think that I'm going to address one of them. I have an issue personally with I use a lot of technology in my classroom, and I use it's very interactive, and I can do things from the classroom and have my students at home be able to work the same lesson because I use these specific practices for pedagogy. And I think that my frustration comes from um, the students being able to use this technology, but we can't because I, I can, right? But I have to pay for it. And in the CUNY system, like the red tape of stopping certain technologies from helping these students, like I think it's counteractive, like there are things that we could be doing that could make the classroom more interactive, that can help us with the social interactions between the students and the sense of self-belonging, but we can't use them, right? So I think that personally to me is a huge issue because I think it restricts us from really getting the students to be engaged in class. So a lot of this, like I end up, it's either I sacrifice the learning or I sacrifice, like my teaching for the students if I don't use these new technologies that we have. And so I choose to sacrifice my money and and buy these things and get these programs so that the students can be interactive and they can learn outside of the classroom. So even if they aren't able to be present because they have a job or because they have to take care of family members or whatever the case is, they could still be present, maybe not at the classroom time, but still be able to do the work, and be able to do it in groups if I so choose, right? If I set it up that certain way. And it's something that I think that we're lacking at John Jay because we're not, I guess it's a CUNY thing, not so much a John Jay thing, to be able to push it forward, right? Are we concerned with what the students are learning or how they're learning, right? Are we concerned with their environment? Are we really concerned with their life outside of the classroom? Are we open to how they learn? And if so, then it's kind of something that is a roadblock for especially an educator like me, because I want them to be able to have access to what we're doing in the classroom, whether or not they might have a problem at home, they're sick, they broke their leg, whatever the case may be. And so I think to me, that is definitely a challenge that I face in my classroom.
I think you make a great point in the sense that instead of thinking of this as human versus technological or AI or whatever else, one ground reality we have to take into consideration is even if technology is able to emulate the human to an extent, is the digital divide making it possible for our students to access it? And like given that we have Blackboard, which like emulates an interface, which probably students didn't see when they were born, it's something from before they were born or other things. So while technologically it's possible to emulate a lot of the human, are our students getting it? So that is something really important that you pointed out. Anyone else wants to share?
I guess I have the same and the opposite problem with technology. History is about reading the primary sources, and if you're lucky, you get a chance to talk about them with people. And my biggest issue is that my students come, "Oh, I didn't read it. I didn't have time to read it." And I get really frustrated because I'm like, it was 10 pages. You had a week to read 10 pages. I'm not asking for a lot. Um, and they're like, "Well, I couldn't listen to it." And I'm like, I don't know what to do at that point because we're looking at historical documents. We're looking at things that were written in the 1800s. They're not available to listen to or to watch. And it's like part of what we do in history is that we develop our skill set in reading. And it's another skill that you guys have to learn.
I'm
So I
glad
try
you
to,
say that. Yes. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I try to break it up into smaller bits. And that recently, one of the history professors is like, I use embedded questions. So as they go through it, they get like the pop-up question where it is. I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but I think I might try to do that. So that way the kids feel like it's more kids. The students feel like it's more interactive and that they have something because I don't know how else to make reading more interactive and fun. Right now, I have questions and I put them separately, but you do have to jump between the two forms.
I think this is
Yeah.
something really important that you pointed out because, if you were sitting in a classroom with them, potentially you could give them 10 minutes to just read it, familiarize themselves with it, rather than like go to an AI summary or something like that. But also the historian who knows about the stuff may not be as competent in creating those question bubbles, right? Or whatever you're talking about. Whereas the person who knows how to do that may have no idea about the subject matter, and you rarely find the person who's competent in both, right? And if they were competent in both, they would probably go into some way more lucrative field and make money. Well, I hope you're not as as much of a skeptic as me yet. But what I'm trying to say is that there's all this talk about like the future of technology and how it's going to revolutionize education and democratize it, whereas the ground reality often looks very different, right? And with like funding being shifted away, we can't hope for better things. So I think that's really relevant. Anyone else wants to share?
Yeah, I was reminded by what Phoenix just spoke about the point that I was thinking, which is that students are, when Phoenix said that her students tell her that, oh, I haven't had time to read these 10 pages. And they're more and more feeling comfortable about saying things like that to us. I didn't have time, da 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 da. And it's this idea that somehow you have to accommodate me. This is how I come to you, professor, without time to read, without time to study, and so maybe the pandemic that created such a crisis where we were trying to be caring to each other and flexible with each other, that's carrying over to now students saying, well, accommodate me. I didn't have time to read this. I didn't have time to do this. So that's one of the points that I share there with Phoenix.
I think also that this is especially relevant to our students at John Jay, because a lot of them don't have the kind of parental support, or they sometimes don't have a space to study and other things, and they're probably trying to read at work or whatever else. And so they actually need more of that human support, and which if it starts lacking in their college experience, it's going to turn up in really scary ways. Noam, did you want to share anything here? Okay. Yes, Angela.
It's interesting because I'm just thinking about the different sort of competing issues, right? So the technology as a facilitator of access at the same time that it has melted people's brains. And I say that including myself, right? And attention spans are not what they should be. Memory is not what it should be. I mean, we lose those muscles if we do not use them, and our students have never had to use them because they grew up with these things, and right. And so I think those two are a challenge, and then sort of competing challenge, just like Phoenix was saying. And then, oh no, I forgot. I got the last piece of it. I forgot, but just Also what Phoenix was saying, there's this ethos of, well, I already know everything because I can look it up on Google. And so I think some of that shows up in the classroom with, well, I already know the answer to this. I don't need to read it. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to analyze it. And then coming back to you a year later saying, oh, I get it now. Right. And so some of the challenges helping the students understand that we actually do know, we are bringing things to them that they need. They might not know it now, right? But I think I don't know the answer to how we get them to see that now. That the reading, that the growth mindset, right? This is another thing I think we've been circling around, that growth mindset of, we're gonna make mistakes. It's normal to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. And that's how you learn and that's how you grow, so that when you're a CEO somewhere, you can have humility and you can learn from mistakes and you can improve whatever you're doing. Like helping them see that, see things from another's perspective. What is the argument for the other side? All of those things are the human pieces that we bring, but I think we're fighting against some of the losses that technology, it gives things, but it also has taken some things away. And some of those are the people parts. Sorry, that's maybe a little bit of a soapbox, but
Absolutely. So, and it makes me think of a parallel example. I once met like a person in a very high position in kind of internet security once, and he is so paranoid about banking, internet security, he writes paper checks in this day and age. And the parallel example of that is that the people who are developing these programs, they are skeptical about their products themselves. They don't take anything there at face value, whereas our students growing up with this are not learning to be critical of what they see as facts, as reality. And I think human interaction of like interacting with real people might help them a little bit into questioning things. And so, there was a third part to my presentation, but I think since there's only about 4 minutes left, I'll just show you the slides there, because one of the things that I was thinking about, I certainly don't have all the answers, was how can we bring back human interaction into our curriculum, our pedagogy, some things to think about. And curriculum and pedagogy are not the same things. Pedagogy is like how you teach in the classroom, how you implement the curriculum. And the curriculum is basically the broader parameters of how your courses fit, how you design your majors and minors, or maybe even the courses and how their relationships to each other. And in these things, how can we bring back the human? As educators, we need to think about this. We also need to think about our classroom management practices, whether online, hybrid, or in person, how can we bring back the human element? And this stems back to my experience last semester with my online classes. Even in online scenarios, how can we make the human instructor presence more visible? Like, whether it is telling our own stories, making students tell their own stories, through videos, audio, through voice thread or whatever else, having more group activities, experiential learning, other things, or even if the class is online, making them go out in the community and doing work. Mentoring could be the subject of a whole new workshop about like presenting models for students, guiding them through a longer time period, as a human guiding another human. And so some of these things really, we have to think through about how we can plan these so that the human does not disappear from our education, and also brick and mortar institutions like ours can stay in relevance. And so some of the ways, and this is something that I researched and found out, that we could encourage could be peer interactions and peer mentoring as well. Discussing ideas, sharing feedback, collaborating on tasks. It goes back to that cooperative learning idea that we were talking about. using group projects, tutoring, and mentoring, implementing social emotional learning programs. So there is a place for emotions in education, and we should not forget that. And implementing programs that make space for that, especially for disadvantaged students who deal with a lot of things in their lives outside of college. Belonging interventions, we talked about that, especially in the first year. Practicing culturally responsive teaching. And this comes from a workshop I actually attended yesterday in my department, which talks about something called instructor uptake, which means that when we encounter students from cultures that we may not be familiar with, we have to be responsive to their body language, to how much they verbally participate, how much they participate in other ways, giving them credit for that, recognizing them, not shutting them up. There may be, for example, the facilitator yesterday was talking about a situation where a student had the habit of interrupting the professor, but that was happening simply because she was not familiar with academic environments. She was the first person in her family to go to college. And, if you put her down for that, that would completely erode her self-esteem. And it did. There was an empirical study that showed that, and then how that could be brought back. Using a community of inquiry framework. So, if you practice your research inquiries as together as a community, or you go out in the community to do your work, that could be human interaction, education of a different kind. Encouraging affective expressions, emotion, human stories, avoidance of solitary experiences. There's a panel later in the day about, I think, isolation or loneliness. I can't remember, but I do plan to attend that. Group cohesion, and then aiming for a relationship-rich education. This is actually from a book that talks about how to center the college educational experience and relationships. And, you can see the table of contents about, creating relationship-rich classrooms, mentoring conversations, etc., etc. So, kind of interesting. But I thought that some of this could be relevant to what we are talking about. So it's not enough to just mourn the loss of the human from the educational sphere, but to try and think about how we can bring it back. And, if online hybrid education is a reality, then it might also be productive to try and think about how we can humanize that. So I guess that's all I had, and we're already over time. And so anybody wanted to make a last comment? No? Okay. Thank you
so much.
everyone for coming. It was a great session.
Thank you very much, Madhura.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm ending the meeting.